Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Frederick Rivera sat in his mahogany-paneled office, the city sprawling beneath his corner window like a chessboard waiting for his next move. At 42, he commanded respect in every room he entered, a self-made millionaire who'd built his security consulting empire from nothing. His steel-gray eyes missed nothing, a trait that had served him well in business and would prove invaluable in the coming months. The divorce papers lay before him, Lucia's signature still wet with the ink of betrayal. 20 years of marriage, reduced to legal documents and property divisions. But Frederick wasn't just any husband. He was a man who specialized in protection, in seeing threats before they materialized, in planning for every contingency. Except he hadn't seen this coming. Lucia Rivera, now soon to be Lucia Richards, had been methodical in her deception. Frederick's private investigator, Dallas Carson, had laid out the timeline with surgical precision. 6 months of secret meetings, burner phones, and elaborate lies. Her affair with Roger Richards, a smooth-talking real estate developer with more debt than sense, had been brewing while Frederick worked 16-hour days to secure their future. "She's been feeding him information about your business dealings," Dallas reported, sliding photographs across the desk. "Account numbers, client lists, security protocols. Richards thinks he's hit the jackpot." Frederick's expression remained unchanged, but his fingers drummed once against the desk, a tell that only those who knew him well would recognize. "And my children? Brady and Dawn are taking her side. They've been poisoned against you for months. Lucia convinced them you're a controlling tyrant who drove her away. Brady, his 20-year-old son, had been distant for months. Dawn, 18 and about to start college, had refused to even speak to him since the separation began. Lucia had played the victim perfectly, painting Frederick as an emotionally absent workaholic who cared more about money than family. The truth was more complex. Frederick had indeed been absent, but not by choice. 3 months ago, he discovered irregularities in his company's accounts. Someone had been systematically stealing client information and selling it to competitors. He'd been working around the clock to identify the leak, never suspecting it was his own wife feeding information to her lover. "There's more," Dallas continued. "Richards isn't just after your wife. He's planning to use the information she's given him to poach your biggest clients. He's already registered a competing business, Pinnacle Security Solutions." Frederick leaned back in his leather chair, a plan already forming. Roger Richards thought he was playing chess, but he was about to discover he'd brought checkers to a grandmaster's game. "I want complete surveillance on both of them," Frederick said, his voice calm as winter steel. "Every phone call, every meeting, every breath they take. And Dallas? Make sure they know I'm watching, but not how closely." That evening, Frederick returned to what had been his family home for 15 years. The Tudor-style mansion sat on 3 acres of manicured grounds, every security system state-of-the-art. Lucia had moved out 2 weeks ago, taking the children with her to Richard's downtown penthouse. The house felt different now, not empty, but purposeful. It had become his war room. In his study, Frederick opened the wall safe that Lucia had never known existed. Inside were documents, photographs, and recordings that would have made his wife's blood run cold. Frederick had been many things in his life: soldier, businessman, protector, but never naive. He'd been documenting everything from the moment he'd sensed something was wrong. The safe also contained something else, a detailed dossier on Roger Richards that Frederick had commissioned months ago when he'd first noticed the man's name appearing too frequently in Lucia's social media activity. What he discovered was enlightening. Richards was a con artist of the highest order. His real estate empire was built on borrowed money and false promises. He'd been married twice before, both marriages ending when his wives discovered his true nature. But most importantly, he had a weakness, a gambling addiction that had cost him everything twice before. Frederick pulled out a burner phone and dialed a number in Las Vegas. "Jimmy, it's Rivera. I need you to set up a private poker game. High stakes. Make sure Roger Richards gets an invitation he can't refuse." Chapter 2. The Trap Springs. 3 weeks later, Lucia stood in the kitchen of Roger's penthouse, her new engagement ring catching the morning light. At 38, she still turned heads, her auburn hair and green eyes as striking as the day Frederick had met her. But beauty had always been her weapon, and Frederick was no longer her target. "The divorce will be final next month," she told Roger as he adjusted his tie. Frederick's being surprisingly cooperative about the settlement. Roger Richards was handsome in a superficial way, tall, silver-haired, with a kind of smile that sold million-dollar properties to people who couldn't afford them. "Probably feels guilty about neglecting you all those years. His loss is my gain." What neither of them knew was that Frederick had been orchestrating every move of the divorce proceedings. Through his lawyer, Dwayne Parrish, he'd structured the settlement to appear generous while actually protecting his most valuable assets. Lucia would get the house, a substantial alimony payment, and what appeared to be half of his liquid assets. In reality, she'd be getting less than a quarter of his true worth. Brady and Dawn had been visiting their father less frequently, their relationship strained by months of Lucia's careful manipulation. But Frederick was patient. He knew his children well enough to understand that they were being used, and eventually they would see the truth. The first crack in Lucia's facade came when Roger's gambling problem resurfaced. Frederick's associates in Las Vegas had done their job perfectly. Roger had been invited to an exclusive game with a credit line that seemed too good to be true. It was. Within a week, Roger owed $500,000 to people who weren't known for their patience. When he came to Lucia, desperate and sweating, she made the mistake Frederick had been waiting for. "We'll use the information from Frederick's files," she suggested. "You said you could get his client list to start your own company. Maybe we can sell some of that information to raise the money." It was exactly the kind of illegal activity Frederick needed to document. His surveillance team, led by Manuel Marquez, captured every word through the sophisticated listening devices they'd installed throughout the penthouse. Meanwhile, Frederick had been building relationships with his children in subtle ways. He'd arranged for Brady to get an internship at a legitimate security firm, one that wasn't connected to Frederick's business. Through this internship, Brady began to understand what his father actually did for a living: protecting people, securing their assets, keeping them safe. Dawn's awakening came through a different route. Frederick had quietly been funding a scholarship program at her college, focusing on students from broken homes. When Dawn learned about it from a friend, she began to question the narrative her mother had fed her about Frederick's character. "Dad's been helping kids whose parents can't afford college," Dawn told Brady during one of their visits to the penthouse. "Mom said he never cared about anyone but himself." Roger, overhearing, was quick to redirect. "People like your father do charity work for tax breaks and publicity. It doesn't mean anything." But the seeds of doubt were planted. Frederick was careful not to push, letting his actions speak for themselves. He knew that direct confrontation would only drive his children further away. The second phase of Frederick's plan involved his business rival, Kim Robertson, who ran the city's other major security firm. Robertson had been trying to destroy Frederick's reputation for years, spreading rumors about his methods and attempting to poach his clients. Frederick decided to give Robertson exactly what he wanted, or so it would seem. Through a series of carefully orchestrated leaks, Frederick made it appear that he was vulnerable, that the divorce had left him distracted and his business weakened. Robertson took the bait, launching an aggressive campaign to steal Frederick's clients just as Roger Richards was preparing to do the same. What neither Robertson nor Richards knew was that Frederick had been feeding them false information about his client base. The companies they thought they were poaching were actually shell corporations Frederick had created, complete with fake executives and fabricated security needs. "They're going to make their move soon," Dallas reported during one of their weekly meetings. "Richards has been showing Lucia's information to potential clients. Robertson's been doing the same with what he thinks he knows about your operations." Frederick nodded, watching through his office window as storm clouds gathered over the city. "Let them. The deeper they dig, the more they'll expose themselves." The third week of April brought the first public humiliation. Roger's gambling debts had become common knowledge in certain circles, and his creditors were growing impatient. When he tried to use the stolen client information to secure a loan against future earnings, he discovered that every contact led to a dead end. The wealthy executives he thought he was impressing turned out to be actors Frederick had hired. The lucrative contracts he was certain he could steal were sophisticated fabrications. Roger had bet everything on information that was worthless, and now he owed money he couldn't possibly repay. Chapter 3. The Web Titans. By early May, cracks were showing in Lucia and Roger's relationship. The stress of his gambling debts, combined with the failure of their business scheme, had made Roger increasingly volatile. Lucia, for her part, was beginning to realize that the man she'd thrown away her marriage for was not the successful businessman he'd pretended to be. Frederick, meanwhile, had been subtle in his approach to winning back his children's trust. He never spoke ill of their mother, never tried to turn them against Roger directly. Instead, he simply continued being the father he'd always been, reliable, protective, and supportive. When Brady's car broke down on a Friday night, it was Frederick who came to pick him up, no questions asked. When Dawn needed help with a research project about corporate ethics, Frederick provided resources and guidance without lecturing her about her living situation. "I don't understand why Mom says such terrible things about Dad," Dawn confided to Brady after Frederick had spent an entire Saturday helping her move furniture in her dorm room. "He's never been anything but good to us." The turning point came when Roger's creditors decided to apply pressure. Frederick had been monitoring their communications, and he knew they were planning something dramatic. He also knew exactly when it would happen. On a Tuesday evening in mid-May, while Lucia was at her book club and the children were at school, 3 large men visited Roger's penthouse. Frederick's surveillance team captured everything: the threats, Roger's breakdown, and most importantly, his admission that he'd been lying about his financial situation from the beginning. "I thought I could make it work," Roger sobbed to the men who were systematically destroying his expensive furniture. "The woman I'm with, her ex-husband has money. I thought I could get access to his accounts." Frederick watched the footage with grim satisfaction. Roger wasn't just a con artist. He was a pathetic one. And now his children would see exactly what kind of man their mother had chosen over their father. The footage found its way to Brady and Dawn through an anonymous email account. Frederick was careful to make it seem like a concerned friend had sent it, someone who wanted them to know what kind of danger their mother might be in. The effect was immediate and devastating. Brady called Frederick within an hour, his voice shaking with rage and confusion. "Dad, we need to talk. Now." Frederick met his children at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant where they could speak privately. For the first time in months, he saw his real children in their eyes, not the resentful strangers Lucia had tried to create. "Why didn't you tell us?" Dawn asked, tears streaming down her face. "Why didn't you warn us about him?" Frederick's response was measured, careful. "Because you needed to discover the truth for yourselves. If I told you, you would have thought I was just trying to turn you against your mother." Brady slammed his fist on the table. "He's been using us. Using Mom. God, Dad, what if he hurts her?" "He won't," Frederick said quietly. "I won't let that happen." That night, Brady and Dawn moved back into their father's house. Lucia returned to the penthouse to find her children gone and a note explaining that they knew about Roger's debts and his plans to exploit Frederick's business information. Roger's reaction was predictable. Cornered and desperate, he lashed out at Lucia, blaming her for the failure of their scheme. The argument was loud enough for neighbors to hear, and someone called the police. By morning, Roger had been arrested for domestic disturbance, and Lucia had spent the night in a women's shelter. Frederick's response was swift and strategic. He appeared at the shelter the next morning, not as a vengeful ex-husband, but as a concerned father who wanted to ensure his children's mother was safe. "Lucia," he said when she agreed to see him, "the children are worried about you. Whatever's happened between us, you're still their mother." She looked terrible, bruised, exhausted, her carefully maintained appearance shattered. "Frederick, you don't need to explain anything to me," he said, "but you do need to get somewhere safe. Roger's in more trouble than you know." It was then that Frederick revealed part of his knowledge. Not everything, but enough to terrify her. Roger owed money to dangerous people. He'd been lying about his business success, and now that his scheme had failed, Those people would be looking for other ways to collect their money. They might come after you, Frederick warned. They might think you have access to money through our divorce settlement. The color drained from Lucia's face. What should I do? Frederick's expression was kind, almost gentle, but his words carried the weight of absolute authority. Come home. Let me protect you and our children until this is resolved. Chapter 4. The Safe's Revelation. Lucia returned to the family home that evening, humbled and frightened. The children were relieved to have their family back together, even under such circumstances. Frederick, ever the gracious host, prepared the guest room for Lucia and made it clear that she was welcome to stay as long as necessary. Roger, meanwhile, had been released on bail, but his world was crumbling. His creditors were closing in, his business was exposed as a fraud, and now he lost Lucia as well. But Roger was nothing if not persistent in his delusions. He convinced himself that if he could just get his hands on some of Frederick's money, he could solve all his problems. Frederick knew this, of course. He'd been counting on Roger's desperation to drive him to one final, fatal mistake. The house had returned to an almost normal routine. Brady and Dawn were relieved to have their family together, even if the circumstances were complicated. Lucia was subdued, clearly processing the reality of how thoroughly she'd been deceived. Frederick was patient, kind even, but there was a distance in his manner that hadn't been there before their separation. On Thursday evening, Frederick made an announcement at dinner. I have to fly to Chicago tomorrow for a client meeting. I'll be back Saturday evening. Will we be safe here? Lucia asked, the fear evident in her voice. The house has the best security system money can buy, Frederick assured her. And Dallas will be monitoring everything remotely. You'll be perfectly safe. What Frederick didn't mention was that he wouldn't actually be going to Chicago. Instead, he would be in a hotel room 20 minutes away, watching everything that happened in his house through the extensive surveillance system he'd had installed months ago. Friday afternoon, while Frederick was supposedly boarding a plane to Chicago, Roger was making his own plans. His desperation had reached a breaking point. The men he owed money to had given him until Monday to produce payment, or they would begin collecting in other ways. Roger had been in the house enough times during his relationship with Lucia to know the layout. He'd also noticed that Frederick had a safe in his study, an old-fashioned combination safe that looked like it might contain cash, documents, or other valuables. That evening, Lucia and the children settled in for a quiet night. They ordered pizza, watched a movie, and by 11 o'clock, everyone had gone to bed. The house was dark and quiet, exactly as Roger had hoped it would be. At 2:30 a.m., Roger used the garage code Lucia had given him months ago to enter the house. He moved carefully through the familiar hallways, his phone's flashlight providing just enough illumination to guide him to Frederick's study. What Roger didn't know was that Frederick had changed all the security codes the day Lucia moved back in. The old code had triggered a silent alarm that went directly to Frederick's phone, and every camera in the house was now recording. Roger found the study easily enough. The safe was exactly where he remembered it, built into the wall behind Frederick's desk. It was an older model, the kind that Roger thought he might be able to crack with enough patience. What Roger also didn't know was that Frederick had left him a present. On the desk, partially hidden under some papers, was a piece of paper with what appeared to be the safe's combination written in Frederick's handwriting. Roger's hands shook as he entered the numbers. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside, Roger found exactly what Frederick had intended him to find. The first thing he saw were stacks of what appeared to be cash, enough to solve his immediate debt problems. But as Roger reached for the money, he realized it wasn't real. The bills were movie props, convincing from a distance, but obviously fake when examined closely. Behind the fake money were photographs. Hundreds of them. Roger recognized himself in most of them. Meeting with Lucia, accepting information about Frederick's business, gambling in Las Vegas, being threatened by his creditors. Every illegal, immoral, or embarrassing moment from the past 6 months was documented in stunning detail. But the photographs weren't the worst discovery. At the bottom of the safe was a thick manila envelope with Roger's name written across it in Frederick's precise handwriting. Inside was a complete dossier on Roger's life, going back 20 years. Every failed business, every bad debt, every woman he'd conned and discarded. Frederick knew everything. The final item in the safe was a single sheet of paper with a brief message. Mr. Richards, by the time you read this, you have already committed breaking and entering, attempted theft, and violated the terms of your bail. Everything you have done tonight has been recorded and will be forwarded to the appropriate authorities. You have until Monday at noon to turn yourself into the police and confess to your crimes. If you do not, I will release everything I know about you to your creditors, your ex-wives, and the media. You will never contact my family again. You will never use any information you obtain from my wife. You will disappear from our lives completely. This is not a negotiation. F. Rivera. Roger stood frozen in the study, the envelope trembling in his hands. Behind him, a voice spoke from the darkness. I told you he thought I was sleeping. Roger spun around to find Frederick standing in the doorway, very much awake and very much in control. The garage code you used was deactivated weeks ago, Frederick continued, his voice calm and conversational. The moment you entered that code, it sent an alert to every security system in the house. Every camera, every microphone, every sensor has been recording since you arrived. Roger's face had gone pale, his usual smooth confidence completely shattered. Frederick, I can explain. No need, Frederick interrupted. I have everything I need. The break-in, the attempted theft, the violation of your bail terms. That's probably enough to send you to prison for several years. You can't. I can, and I will, unless you do exactly what that letter says. Turn yourself in Monday morning. Confess to everything. Serve your time quietly, and never, ever contact my family again. Roger looked around the study desperately, as if searching for an escape route. But Frederick had anticipated every possibility. The house was surrounded by security personnel, the police were already on their way, and every avenue of escape was blocked. What about Lucia? Roger asked desperately. She helped me. She gave me the information. Frederick's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than any shout. My wife was manipulated by a professional con artist. She made mistakes, but she was a victim of your lies. You, however, are exactly what you appear to be, a predator who targets vulnerable women. The sound of sirens grew louder outside. Frederick had timed everything perfectly. The police will be here in about 3 minutes, Frederick said. You have a choice. Come quietly now and stick to our arrangement, or try to run and face the full consequences of every crime you've committed in the past year. Roger's shoulders sagged in defeat. He was beaten, and he knew it. Chapter 5. The Unraveling. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching the somber mood that had settled over the Rivera household. Roger had indeed turned himself in, just as Frederick had instructed. The local news covered the story with the kind of breathless sensationalism usually reserved for celebrity scandals. Local real estate developer arrested for multiple fraud charges. Lucia sat at the kitchen table, staring at the newspaper without really reading it. The past 3 days have been a whirlwind of police interviews, legal consultations, and painful conversations with Brady and Dawn. The children had been supportive but distant, clearly struggling to understand how their mother could have been so thoroughly deceived. Frederick entered the kitchen, dressed for work as if this were just another ordinary Monday. His composure was unshakable, his manner toward Lucia polite but distant. The divorce papers are ready for final signatures, he said, pouring himself coffee. Dwayne says we can finalize everything by the end of the week. Lucia looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Frederick, I need you to know how sorry I am. Not just about Roger, but about everything. I destroyed our family for a lie. Frederick sat across from her, his expression unreadable. You made choices, Lucia. We all did. Now we deal with the consequences. Is there any chance? She began hopefully. No. Frederick's voice was final, absolute. There isn't. The word hung in the air between them like a door slamming shut. Lucia had hoped, despite everything, that Frederick might be willing to consider reconciliation. After all, he protected her from Roger's creditors, allowed her back into the house, been kind to her in her moment of crisis. But Frederick Rivera was not a man who forgave betrayal. He'd shown her mercy, yes, but mercy was not the same as forgiveness. He'd protected her because she was the mother of his children, because it served his own purposes, and because it was the right thing to do. But the trust between them was broken beyond repair. "What about the children?" Lucia asked. "How do we handle custody? Brady is 20 years old and can make his own decisions. Dawn will be 18 in 2 months and heading to college. I think they're old enough to choose where they want to live and how much contact they want with each parent." It was a diplomatic answer, but Lucia understood the subtext. The children had seen their mother's judgment fail spectacularly. They'd watched her choose a con artist over their father, then stand by while that same con artist plotted to steal from their family. Forgiveness might come eventually, but trust would take much longer to rebuild. That afternoon, Frederick met with Dallas Carson to wrap up the surveillance operation. The evidence they'd gathered was comprehensive, enough to ensure Roger would spend several years in prison and face civil lawsuit from his other victims for decades to come. "Kim Robertson is backing down from his poaching attempts," Dallas reported. Turns out, when he realized he'd been chasing fake clients, he understood he'd been outmaneuvered. He's actually reached out about establishing some kind of cooperation agreement. Frederick nodded. Robertson wasn't evil, just competitive. Now that he understood the depth of Frederick's strategic thinking, he was smart enough to want to be an ally rather than an enemy. And the children? Brady's been asking questions about the family business. I think he might be interested in learning the security trade. Dawn's been researching criminal justice programs at her college. Roger's crimes seemed to have sparked an interest in law enforcement. Frederick allowed himself a small smile. His children were resilient, intelligent, and apparently had inherited his sense of justice. They would be fine, but there was still one more piece of business to complete. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. Wednesday evening, Frederick called a family meeting in the living room. Brady and Dawn sat together on the couch, while Lucia took a chair across from them. Frederick remained standing, looking every inch the patriarch, making a final judgment. "I want everyone to understand what happens next," he began. "The divorce will be final Friday. Your mother will receive the settlement we agreed upon, the house, alimony, and her share of the liquid assets." Lucia looked surprised. After everything that had happened, she'd expected Frederick to try to reduce the settlement or find ways to punish her financially. However, Frederick continued, "There are conditions." Lucia's expression grew wary. "First, you will never discuss my business operations with anyone outside this family. What you learned about my clients, my methods, or my finances dies with you. This is not negotiable." Lucia nodded quickly. She'd learned enough about Frederick's capabilities to know that crossing him would be foolish. "Second, if you ever remarry or become involved with someone seriously, I will conduct a complete background investigation on that person. If I find they pose any threat to our children or to you, I will act accordingly." "Frederick, that's me protecting my family," he said firmly. "Your judgment in partners has proven questionable. I won't allow our children to be put at risk again." Brady and Dawn exchanged glances but didn't object. They'd been traumatized enough by the Roger situation to appreciate their father's protective instincts. "Third, and this is the most important condition, you will rebuild your relationship with our children on their terms, not yours. You will not attempt to manipulate them, guilt them, or turn them against me. If you violate this condition, I will pursue full custody of Dawn until she turns 18, and I will ensure Brady understands exactly how you try to use him against me." Lucia's face went pale. "I would never." "You already did," Frederick said quietly. "For months, you poisoned them against me while you were planning to steal from me. You used our children as weapons in your affair. That ends now." The room fell silent. Even Brady and Dawn seemed shocked by the brutal honesty of Frederick's assessment. "Do you accept these conditions?" Frederick asked. Lucia looked around the room, at her children, who were watching her carefully, at Frederick, who stood like a judge waiting for her plea. She understood that this was not really a negotiation. These were the terms of her surrender. "I accept," she whispered. Frederick nodded. "Good. Now, there's something else you all need to know." He walked to his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. 3 months ago, I discovered that someone was stealing information from my company and selling it to competitors. I spent weeks investigating, thinking it was an employee or a hacker. It never occurred to me that it was my own wife. Brady sat forward. Mom, you were selling Dad's business secrets? Not selling, Lucia said quickly. Roger said he needed the information to understand how to compete legitimately. You were giving detailed client information to a man who intended to start a competing business, Frederick corrected. In the security industry, that's not just unethical, it's potentially dangerous. Some of my clients are under witness protection. Others are celebrities or politicians who receive death threats. Their safety depends on confidentiality. Dawn gasped. Mom, people could have been hurt. Frederick set the folder on the coffee table. Fortunately, I realized what was happening before any real damage was done. I fed false information to your mother for the past 2 months, and she passed it all along to Roger. Lucia stared at the folder as if it contained snakes. You knew? The whole time. I suspected early on. I confirmed it 6 weeks ago. Everything since then has been part of a controlled operation to expose Roger's true nature and protect this family from further damage. Brady looked at his father with something approaching awe. You orchestrated all of this? Roger's arrest, the fake client information, everything? Roger orchestrated his own downfall, Frederick corrected. I simply provided him with enough rope to hang himself. Men like Roger Richards are predictable. They always overreach, and they always make mistakes. I just made sure he made them where I could document everything. Dawn shook her head in amazement. Dad, that's incredible. Frederick's expression remained serious. It was necessary, and now it's over. He looked directly at Lucia. You have a chance to rebuild your life, to repair your relationships with our children. Don't waste it. Lucia nodded, tears streaming down her face. She understood now that Frederick could have destroyed her completely, financially, legally, socially. Instead, he'd chosen to give her a path forward, albeit one with very strict boundaries. What about us? Brady asked. The family, I mean. Are we going to be okay? Frederick's expression softened slightly as he looked at his children. We're going to be better than okay. We're going to be honest with each other, protective of each other, and loyal to each other. We're going to be a real family again. It was a promise, a threat, and a prophecy all at once. Chapter 7, Justice Served. 6 months later, Roger Richards stood in an orange jumpsuit before Judge Laureen Copeland, awaiting his sentencing. The courtroom was packed with his victims, investors he'd defrauded, women he'd manipulated, creditors he'd stiffed. Frederick sat in the back row, watching with quiet satisfaction as justice finally caught up with a man who'd spent decades avoiding consequences. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Mallory Stewart, had built an airtight case. Roger's crimes went far beyond his attempts to steal from Frederick's business. The investigation had uncovered a pattern of fraud spanning 20 years in multiple states. Mr. Richards, Judge Copeland said, her voice stern, you have pled guilty to 17 counts of fraud, theft, and conspiracy. Your victims include 3 ex-wives, numerous business partners, and dozens of investors who trusted you with their life savings. Roger stood silently, his lawyer beside him looking resigned. There was no defense for what he'd done, no mitigating circumstances that could excuse 2 decades of systematic predation. The court sentences you to 12 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 8 years. You are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $2.3 million to your victims. Roger's legs seemed to buckle slightly. Even with good behavior, he'd be in his 60s before he saw freedom again. Frederick didn't smile as he left the courthouse, but there was satisfaction in knowing that Roger would never hurt another family the way he tried to hurt theirs. Meanwhile, Lucia had been quietly rebuilding her life. She'd moved into a modest apartment downtown, taken a job at a nonprofit organization, and begun the slow process of earning back her children's trust. Frederick had been true to his word. The settlement had been generous enough to ensure she could live comfortably, but not so generous that she could return to her previous lifestyle of leisure and indulgence. Brady had indeed joined his father's business, starting at the bottom and learning every aspect of the security trade. His experience with Roger had given him insight into how predators operated, making him particularly effective at threat assessment. Dawn had changed her major to criminal justice and was excelling in her studies. She told her father that watching him methodically expose Roger's crimes had inspired her to pursue a career in law enforcement. "I want to protect people the way you protected us," she'd said. The family dynamic had evolved into something stronger than it had been before the crisis. Frederick, Brady, and Dawn formed a tight unit based on mutual respect and shared values. Lucia remained on the periphery, grateful to be included, but understanding that her position in the family had fundamentally changed. One evening in late November, the four of them sat around the dinner table in Frederick's house. It had become a weekly tradition, family dinner every Sunday, where they could maintain connections and discuss their lives. "I got promoted to senior analyst," Brady announced. "Dad says I can start training for field work next month." "That's wonderful," Lucia said, meaning it. Her son had found his calling, and despite everything that had happened, she was proud of him. Dawn looked up from her textbook. "I've been accepted into the FBI's college internship program. If I do well, they might offer me a position after graduation." Frederick nodded approvingly. "You've earned it. Your professors speak very highly of your work." Lucia watched her family interact, noting the easy camaraderie between Frederick and their children, the way they included her but didn't depend on her approval. It was painful, but it was also what she'd earned through her choices. "Frederick," she said during a lull in conversation, "I want to thank you again for giving me the chance to be part of this. I know I don't deserve it." Frederick looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You're the mother of my children. That will never change. But Lucia, understand this. The woman I was married to for 20 years no longer exists. That woman earned my forgiveness long ago. You are someone new, someone who must earn her place in this family one day at a time." It was harsh but fair. Lucia nodded, understanding that this was likely the closest thing to absolution she would ever receive from Frederick. Chapter 8. New Beginnings. 2 years had passed since Roger's sentencing, and the Rivera family had settled into their new normal. Frederick's business had grown substantially, partly due to the reputation he'd gained for thoroughness, and partly because word had spread about how he'd protected his family from a sophisticated con artist. Brady had developed into an exceptional security specialist, his experience with Roger having given him an almost supernatural ability to spot deception. Clients specifically requested him for sensitive cases involving potential fraud or manipulation. Dawn had graduated summa cum laude and accepted a position with the FBI's white-collar crime division. Her first assignment was working on a task force investigating romance scams, criminals who targeted vulnerable women online, much like Roger had targeted her mother. Lucia had found her own path to redemption through her work at the nonprofit. She'd become an advocate for victims of financial fraud, using her experience with Roger to help other women recognize the warning signs of manipulation. It was painful work, but it gave her a sense of purpose she'd never had before. Frederick watched his family's growth with quiet pride. His children had not only survived their mother's betrayal, but had become stronger because of it. They understood the value of loyalty, the importance of protecting family, and the consequences of broken trust. On a crisp October evening, Frederick stood in his study, looking at the safe that had played such a crucial role in Roger's downfall. He'd kept it exactly as it was that night, empty except for a single photograph of his family taken the Christmas before Lucia's affair began. Behind him, Brady entered carrying a cup of coffee. "Dad, there's something I've been wanting to ask you," Brady said. Frederick turned, noting the serious expression on his son's face. "That night when Roger broke in, when you confronted him in the study, you said you thought he was sleeping. But you weren't in Chicago at all, were you? You were here the whole time." Frederick smiled slightly. It was the first time anyone had questioned that detail of the story. "I was in the house," Frederick confirmed. "I'd been monitoring everything from the basement security room. I knew Roger would come eventually. Desperate men always make desperate choices. So when you appeared in the doorway, you'd been watching him the entire time?" "From a moment he entered the garage. I wanted to give him every opportunity to incriminate himself completely before I revealed myself. Brady shook his head in admiration. You don't leave anything to chance, do you? In my business, son, chance gets people killed. In my family, chance gets people hurt. I prefer certainty. It was a philosophy that had served Frederick well throughout his life. He'd built his fortune by anticipating problems and preparing solutions. He'd protected his family by understanding threats and neutralizing them before they could cause damage. As autumn turned to winter, Frederick found himself reflecting on the lessons of the past 3 years. He'd learned that trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired, but that new relationships could be built on the foundation of hard-earned wisdom. He discovered that his children were stronger than he'd ever imagined, capable of surviving betrayal and emerging with their integrity intact. Most importantly, he'd proven to himself that some things were worth fighting for, even when the battle required patience, planning, and the willingness to sacrifice mercy for justice. The safe in his study remained empty, but Frederick's life was full of purpose, of family, and of the quiet satisfaction that came from protecting those he loved from those who would do them harm. Chapter 9. Legacy. 5 years after Roger's arrest, Frederick Rivera stood before a gathering of security professionals at the annual International Protection Conference. He'd been invited to speak about family security, and his presentation had drawn the largest audience in the conference's history. The greatest threats to our clients often come from those closest to them, Frederick told the assembled crowd. Betrayal is intimate. It requires access, trust, and knowledge of vulnerabilities. Our job is not just to protect against external threats, but to help our clients understand the risks that exist within their own circles. In the audience, Brady took notes on his father's presentation. He'd heard these principles countless times over the years, but he never tired of learning from Frederick's experience. After the presentation, father and son walked through the hotel lobby together. Your mother called yesterday, Frederick mentioned casually. She wanted to let us know she's been promoted to Director of Victim Services at the nonprofit. Brady nodded. His relationship with Lucia had stabilized over the years, built on mutual respect rather than the automatic affection of childhood. That's good for her. She's found something she's good at. She has. And more importantly, she's found something that matters to her. It was as close to forgiveness as Frederick would ever come. He could acknowledge Lucia's growth, appreciate her contributions, and wish her well, but the trust between them would never be restored. Dawn had called the week before with news of her own engagement to a fellow FBI agent she'd met during a joint task force operation. Frederick had already begun the background investigation that would ensure his future son-in-law was worthy of his daughter's trust. Some people think I'm too controlling, Frederick had told Dawn when she'd objected to his investigation. Some people haven't been through what we've been through, Dawn had replied. Check away, Dad. I trust your judgment more than my own when it comes to character assessment. It was a sad commentary on the lasting effects of betrayal, but Frederick was proud that his children had learned to value security over romance, substance over charm. That evening, Frederick sat in his study, the same room where Roger had made his fatal mistake years earlier. The safe was no longer empty. It now contained something far more valuable than money or documents. Letters from his children, photographs of family moments, and a journal he'd begun keeping after the divorce. In that journal, Frederick had written the lessons he'd learned from his experience. Trust is earned through consistency over time. It cannot be rebuilt with words alone. Family loyalty must be mutual. Those who betray family forfeit the protection family provides. Justice delayed is not justice denied, if the delay serves a greater purpose. The greatest strength is the ability to wait for exactly the right moment to act. Mercy without accountability enables future harm. Children learn more from what we do than from what we say. Frederick closed the journal and looked at the framed photograph on his desk. Brady in his security consultant uniform, Dawn in her FBI graduation cap and gown, and Frederick himself standing between them. It had been taken 6 months ago, and it captured something the family photos from his marriage had never shown. Genuine pride, hard-earned respect, and unbreakable bonds. His phone buzzed with a text message from Brady. "Dad, just wanted you to know, I've never been prouder to be your son. Thanks for showing us what real strength looks like." Frederick smiled, genuinely this time. He'd set out to protect his family from a con artist and ended up teaching them the most valuable lesson of all, that integrity, once established, becomes its own form of power. The safe secret had never been what Roger found inside it. The real secret was what Frederick had built around it, a fortress of family loyalty that could withstand any assault from those who mistook kindness for weakness. In the end, Frederick Rivera had done more than exact revenge on his betrayers. He'd created a legacy of strength, wisdom, and uncompromising standards that would protect his family for generations to come. Justice, it turned out, was not just about punishment. Sometimes it was about transformation, turning a family's worst crisis into their greatest source of strength. Frederick Rivera had always been a man who specialized in protection. Now, he was a man who had learned that the best protection comes not from walls or weapons, but from the unshakable knowledge that those you love will never, ever betray you. And for those who might be tempted to try, well, they would discover what Roger Richards had learned in that study 5 years ago. Frederick Rivera never forgave betrayal, and he never forgot. But most importantly, he never let his guard down again. The safe remained in his study, a reminder of the night everything changed. But Frederick no longer needed its contents to feel secure. His real treasures, his children's loyalty, their respect, and their understanding of what family truly meant, were beyond the reach of any thief. Some wounds never heal completely, but sometimes in the scar tissue, you find something stronger than what was there before. Frederick Rivera had built his life around that truth, and it had served him well. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Robert Mitchell had built his empire from nothing. At 52, he owned 3 successful construction companies, a portfolio of rental properties, and investments that most men could only dream of. His hands, scarred from years of manual labor before he became the boss, still carried the calluses that reminded him where he came from. The penthouse office overlooking downtown gave him a view of half the buildings his companies had erected, but tonight, those same hands trembled as he stared at the photographs spread across his mahogany desk. Tracy, his wife of 23 years, wrapped in the arms of Dylan Pierce, her personal trainer. The images were crystal clear, taken through the window of their lake house, the one Rob had bought her for their 15th anniversary. The same house where they conceived their youngest, Kevin. The irony wasn't lost on him. Rob's private investigator, Tommy Russo, sat across from him, chain-smoking despite the no-smoking policy. Tommy was an ex-cop who'd lost his badge for being too aggressive, but his methods got results. "How long?" Rob asked, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. 6 months, maybe longer. "Your wife's been real careful about covering her tracks, but Pierce? He's sloppy. Thinks with the wrong head." Tommy tapped ash into Rob's crystal paperweight. Neighbor security cameras caught them at least a dozen times. "Want me to dig deeper?" Rob studied the timeline Tommy had constructed. Tracy's sudden interest in fitness, her weekend trips to visit her sister, the way she'd become distant and critical of everything he did. It all made sense now. But what cut deepest wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the calculation behind it. Tracy had been planning this for months, maybe years. "What about the kids?" Rob asked. Tommy shifted uncomfortably. "Amanda knows. Has for a while. She's been covering for your wife. Even gave her alibi for some of the meetups. Kevin, he's clueless, but he'd probably side with Mom if it came to light. You know how these custody battles go." The words hit Rob like a physical blow. His daughter, his princess, The one he'd walked down the aisle just 3 years ago had been complicit in this betrayal. Amanda, who'd asked him for $50,000 for her wedding, who still called him daddy when she wanted something, had been stabbing him in the back. Rob closed the folder and looked out at the city lights. 23 years of marriage, 2 children, a life built on what he thought was solid ground. But the foundation had been rotting from the inside. "I want everything," Rob said finally. "Bank records, phone logs, credit card statements. Every hotel, every restaurant, every lie." And Tommy, he turned to face the investigator, and Tommy saw something in Rob's eyes that made him nervous. Find out what Pierce values most. Everyone has pressure points. After Tommy left, Rob sat alone in his office until dawn. He didn't go home that night or the next. Instead, he began making calls to lawyers, accountants, and a few other professionals whose services weren't advertised in the yellow pages. By the time Tracy noticed his absence, Rob Mitchell, the man who'd never lost a business deal, never backed down from a fight, never forgiven a betrayal, was already 3 moves ahead. Chapter 2: The Art of War. Tracy Mitchell stood in the master bedroom of their $4 million home, holding her phone with trembling fingers. Rob had been gone for 4 days without explanation, and her calls went straight to voicemail. Dylan paced behind her, his usually confident demeanor cracking. "Maybe he knows," Dylan said, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. "Rich guys like him have resources. Private investigators, security teams." "Shut up," Tracy snapped. "Rob's clueless. He's probably just having another one of his midlife crisis moments. Remember when he bought that motorcycle?" But deep down, Tracy felt the shift. Rob hadn't touched her in months. She'd assumed it was stress from work. Now she wondered if there was more to it. She'd been so careful, so methodical in her planning. The affair with Dylan had started innocently enough, just sessions at the gym that turned into coffee, then lunch, then afternoon meetings at the lake house. Dylan was everything Rob wasn't. Young, attentive, passionate. He made her feel like the woman she used to be before she became Mrs. Robert Mitchell, trophy wife and mother. The plan had been simple. String Rob along until she could figure out how to maximize her divorce settlement, then disappear with Dylan to start fresh. At 45, she deserved happiness, and Dylan, at 32, gave her that. The prenup she'd signed in her early 20s was ironclad, but she'd been researching ways around it. Infidelity, mental cruelty, hidden assets, there were angles to work. Amanda arrived that evening, letting herself in with her key. At 26, she was a younger version of her mother, beautiful, manipulative, and always looking for the angle that benefited her most. She'd inherited Rob's business sense, but used it for personal gain rather than empire building. "Where's Dad?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. "Working," Tracy lied smoothly. "You know how he gets when there's a big project." Amanda studied her mother's face. She'd been covering for Tracy's affair because it served her purposes. A messy divorce meant she could play both sides, extract money for both parents. She'd already started planting seeds with Rob about how Tracy deserved a generous settlement, how the family should stick together. But Rob's sudden disappearance worried her. Meanwhile, across town, Rob sat in a windowless room above Tommy's office, surrounded by surveillance equipment and legal documents. 3 divorce attorneys, the city's most ruthless, had spent the afternoon explaining Tracy's options and, more importantly, how to eliminate every single one of them. "The prenup is solid," confirmed Margaret Shunn, whose reputation for destroying cheating spouses was legendary. "But we need to be careful about how this plays out. She'll claim emotional abuse, try to invalidate the agreement. We need her to make the first move, show her true colors." Rob nodded. He'd already transferred assets, restructured business partnerships, and created legal landmines that would detonate the moment Tracy filed for divorce. But that wasn't enough. He wanted more than financial victory. He wanted total destruction. "What about Pierce?" Rob asked Tommy. Interesting background. Guy's been scamming wealthy women for years. Married 3 times, each time to clients with money. Divorced all of them within 2 years after bleeding them dry. "Your wife isn't his first victim. She's just his biggest score yet." Rob smiled for the first time in days. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Set up a meeting with Pierce. Tell him a wealthy client wants to discuss private training sessions. Big money, exclusive arrangement. You sure about this, Rob? Things could get messy. Rob thought about Amanda's betrayal, Tracy's calculated deception, the years of lies building up like compound interest. They already are messy, Tommy. I'm just evening the playing field. As night fell over the city, Rob made one final call. The voice that answered was rough, professional, and expensive. It's Mitchell. I need that favor we discussed. Chapter 3. The First Strike. Dylan Pierce drove his pristine BMW through the gates of Rob Mitchell's industrial complex, impressed despite himself. The meeting location seemed odd for discussing personal training, but wealthy clients often had quirks. The client had specified privacy above all else, and the payout promised was more than Dylan made in 6 months of regular sessions. The warehouse was dimly lit, with construction equipment scattered throughout. Dylan's confidence wavered as he realized how isolated the location was. When Rob Mitchell stepped out of the shadows, Dylan's blood turned to ice. "Mr. Pierce," Rob said calmly, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Thank you for coming." Dylan tried to maintain his composure, but his hand shook as he extended it for a handshake that never came. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I was told a client wanted to discuss training services." "Oh, there's no misunderstanding," Rob replied, circling Dylan like a predator. "I'm a client. I've been paying for your services for months, actually. Every hotel room, every dinner, every time you've been with my wife. I've been funding your little romance." The color drained from Dylan's face. This wasn't how these confrontations usually went. In his experience, wealthy husbands either threw money at the problem or simply looked the other way. They didn't lure you to abandoned warehouses. "Look, Mr. Mitchell, I can explain." "No need," Rob interrupted. "I know exactly what you are, Pierce. You're a predator who targets vulnerable women with money. Patricia Henley in Denver took her for $200,000. Jennifer Walsh in Seattle left her broke and destroyed her marriage to a tech executive. Should I continue?" Dylan's jaw dropped. Rob had done his homework, but more than that, he'd connected dots that law enforcement had missed. Dylan's pattern of operations across multiple states, always staying just within legal boundaries while destroying lives. "I don't know what you think you know, but..." Rob held up a tablet, playing surveillance footage of Dylan with 3 different women in 3 different cities, all wealthy, all middle-aged, all eventually abandoned. "I know you're a parasite, Pierce. But what you don't know is that I'm the wrong host to try to feed on." 2 men emerged from behind the construction equipment, not thugs, but professionals. Clean-cut, methodical, the kind of men who solve problems quietly and efficiently. Dylan recognized the type from his time in the military, before he discovered that seducing lonely wives was easier than honest work. "Here's how this is going to work," Rob continued. "You're going to end things with my wife. Tonight, you're going to tell her you found someone else, that you never loved her, that she was just an easy mark. You're going to break her heart so thoroughly that she'll never recover. And if I refuse..." Rob smiled that cold smile again. "Then my friends here will ensure that your career seducing wealthy women comes to a permanent end. They're very creative, and I'm very angry. Your choice." Dylan's military training kicked in, assessing his chances. 2 armed professionals in an isolated location, with a man who clearly had the resources to make problems disappear. The smart play was obvious. "What guarantee do I have that you'll let me walk away?" "My word," Rob said simply. "Break my wife's heart, disappear from our lives forever, and you'll never see me again. But if you ever contact her, if you ever come back to this city, if you so much as send her a Christmas card..." Rob let the threat hang in the air. Dylan nodded slowly. He'd cut his losses before, moved on to easier targets. Tracy Mitchell was beautiful and wealthy, but she wasn't worth dying for. That night, Tracy's world shattered in the parking lot of their usual hotel. Dylan was cold, cruel, efficient in his rejection. He told her she was too old, too desperate, too pathetic. He laughed when she cried, told her she'd been nothing more than a midlife crisis cure for a bored trainer looking for easy money. Tracy drove home in a haze of humiliation and heartbreak, not noticing the car that followed her at a distance or the cameras that documented her tears. She found Rob waiting in the living room, sipping whiskey and reading the newspaper as if nothing had happened. "How was your evening, dear?" he asked without looking up. Tracy ran upstairs without answering, locking herself in the bathroom to sob. She had no idea that this was only the beginning, that Rob's true revenge was yet to come, or that her daughter was about to learn the cost of betrayal. Chapter 4: Family Fractures. Amanda Mitchell sat in her father's penthouse office 3 days after Dylan's brutal rejection of her mother, studying Rob's face for any sign of weakness. She'd always been able to read him, to manipulate his love for her into financial advantage. But the man sitting across from her now was different, colder, more calculating. "Mom's devastated," Amanda said, playing the concerned daughter. "She won't come out of her room, won't eat. Maybe you two should talk, work things out. Marriage counseling, or something." Rob set down his coffee and looked at his daughter with eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Interesting suggestion, coming from someone who's been helping your mother deceive me for months." Amanda's practiced expression of concern faltered. "I don't know what you mean, Daddy." "Don't." Rob's voice was sharp enough to cut. "Don't call me that, and don't insult my intelligence. Tommy Russo is very thorough. I have records of every text message you sent giving your mother alibis. I know about the credit card you helped her hide, the phone you bought her specifically for communicating with peers. I know everything, Amanda." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Amanda had always prided herself on being smart, on staying ahead of the game. But looking at her father now, she realized she'd been playing checkers while he'd been playing chess. "You don't understand," she said, her voice smaller now. "Mom was unhappy. You're always working, always focused on business. She needed someone to pay attention to her. So you helped her find someone?" Rob's laugh was bitter. "My own daughter, facilitating my wife's adultery. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" Amanda tried a different approach, the one that had always worked before. Tears welled in her eyes. Her voice became small and vulnerable. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I made a mistake. I just wanted Mom to be happy, and I thought maybe if you knew she was seeing someone, you'd pay more attention to her, fight for her. I never meant for it to go this far." But Rob had seen this performance too many times. The tears that had once melted his heart now only fueled his rage. "You're exactly like your mother. Everything is calculated, every emotion is performed. You didn't want her to be happy. You wanted to hedge your bets. Keep me ignorant while helping her set up her exit strategy." "That's not true." Rob opened a folder and pulled out financial records. 3 months ago, you asked me for money to expand your boutique. 50,000, you said. Emergency loan to save your business. But the business was never in trouble, was it? You needed cash to help your mother stockpile funds for her divorce. Amanda's face went white. The boutique had been her cover story, but she'd actually been helping Tracy move money into hidden accounts, preparing for the day she'd leave Rob. Amanda had skimmed 20% off the top for herself, insurance money for when the family imploded. "I have bank records, Amanda. Transactions, transfers, a paper trail that shows you've been stealing from me while helping your mother plan her escape. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" The tears stopped. Amanda's mask finally slipped, revealing the calculating woman underneath. "So what? You've got more money than you know what to do with. Mom deserves half of everything she helped you build, and I deserve compensation for 26 years of being Robert Mitchell's daughter. Do you know what it's like living in your shadow, never being good enough, never measuring up to your precious business empire?" There it was, the truth Rob had suspected but hoped wasn't real. His daughter didn't love him. She resented him. Everything had been about money, position, advantage. "You're right," Rob said quietly. "You do deserve compensation. In fact, I've already started the process." He slid another document across the desk. "Effective immediately, you're cut off. No more allowance, no more credit cards, no more bailouts. The boutique loan? I'm calling it in. Full payment due in 30 days. Amanda grabbed the paper, scanning it frantically. "You can't do this. I'm your daughter." "Biology doesn't excuse betrayal," Rob said, standing. You made your choice when you chose your mother's side. Now live with the consequences. Kevin will never forgive you for this. Rob's smile was cold. Kevin doesn't know about any of this yet. But when he finds out, and he'll learn the same lesson you're learning now. Actions have consequences, and I never forgive betrayal. Not from my wife, not from my daughter, not from anyone. Amanda stormed out, her heels clicking angrily on the marble floor. But Rob wasn't finished with her. Not by a long shot. He had plans for Amanda, plans that would teach her the true cost of crossing Robert Mitchell. As the elevator doors closed behind his daughter, Rob made another call. It's time for phase 2, he said into the phone. And this time, we're going after the whole family. Chapter 5, The Trap Springs. Kevin Mitchell was the only innocent left in the family, and Rob intended to keep it that way, at least until the boy chose his own side. At 19, Kevin was everything Rob had been at that age. Hungry, ambitious, and naive about the true nature of the people closest to him. Unlike Amanda, Kevin had never asked for handouts. He worked part-time while studying business at the state university, planning to earn his place in his father's empire rather than inherit it. That morning, Rob sat in Kevin's dorm room, watching his son pack for what he thought was a weekend trip home. Kevin had no idea that his family was imploding, that his mother was locked in her bedroom, drowning in humiliation, or that his sister was frantically trying to liquidate assets before Rob's lawyers froze everything. "Dad, you seem different lately," Kevin said, folding clothes into his duffel bag. "Mom says you're working too much, staying at the office. Everything okay?" Rob studied his youngest child, looking for signs of Tracy's manipulation or Amanda's calculation. But Kevin's concerns seemed genuine, untainted by the poison that had infected the rest of the family. "Things are changing, son," Rob said carefully. "Sometimes you discover that people aren't who you thought they were. When that happens, you have to decide what kind of man you want to be." Kevin paused his packing. "Are you and Mom having problems?" The direct question hung in the air. Rob could lie, protect Kevin's innocence a little longer, give him plausible deniability when the family war went public. Or he could tell the truth and see which side Kevin chose. "Your mother has been having an affair for 6 months," Rob said quietly. "Your sister knew about it and helped cover it up. They've been stealing money from me, planning to take half of everything I've built and disappear with her boyfriend." Kevin sank onto his bed, the color draining from his face. That's not possible. Mom loves you. Amanda would never." "I have evidence, Kevin. Photos, bank records, text messages. Your mother and sister have been playing a long game, and I was the mark." Rob pulled out a tablet, showing Kevin the surveillance photos of Tracy and Dylan. "This is who your mother really is." Kevin stared at the images, his world tilting off its axis. The photos were damning. Intimate moments between his mother and a man barely older than himself, captured with clinical precision. But worse than the betrayal was the calculation behind it, the cold planning that the evidence revealed. "What are you going to do?" Kevin asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm going to destroy them," Rob said simply. "Both of them. Completely. Your mother will lose everything. The house, the cars, her social standing, her future. Amanda will learn what it means to live without my protection and money. They chose to betray me, and I never forgive betrayal." Kevin looked up at his father, seeing something he'd never seen before. A ruthlessness that was both terrifying and impressive. This wasn't the father who'd taught him to ride a bike or helped with homework. This was Robert Mitchell, the businessman, the man who'd crushed competitors and built an empire through sheer force of will. "What about me?" Kevin asked. "That's your choice," Rob said. "You can stand with them, try to hold the family together, forgive and forget. If you do, you'll go down with them. Or you can stand with me and learn what it really means to be a Mitchell." The weight of the decision settled on Kevin's shoulders. He thought about his mother, probably upstairs crying over a man who'd used her and thrown her away. He thought about Amanda, always scheming, always looking for an angle. Then he looked at his father, the man who'd built everything they had, who'd given them opportunities and advantages, only to be betrayed by the people he loved most. "They really did this?" Kevin asked. "Mom and Amanda really betrayed you?" Rob nodded. "For months. While I was working to secure your future, your sister's business, your mother's lifestyle, they were planning to take it all and disappear. Kevin stood up, his decision made. Then they deserve whatever you do to them. Rob felt a mixture of pride and sadness. Kevin had chosen correctly, but that choice would change him forever. The boy who'd entered college still believing in the fundamental goodness of family was about to become a man who understood that loyalty was earned, not given. Good, Rob said, because I'm going to need your help. What I'm planning will require someone they trust, someone who can get close to them without raising suspicion. Kevin's eyes hardened with a resolve that reminded Rob of himself at that age. Tell me what you need me to do. Outside the dorm room window, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering the campus in pristine white. By the time it melted, the Mitchell family would be unrecognizable, and Kevin would have learned the most valuable lesson his father could teach him. In a world full of predators, you were either the hunter or the prey. Chapter 6. The Son's Gambit. Tracy Mitchell had been locked in a master bedroom for a week, surviving on the meals Kevin brought her and the pills Dr. Patel had prescribed for her nervous exhaustion. She hadn't spoken to Rob since the night Dylan destroyed her heart, hadn't even asked where her husband was spending his nights. The humiliation was too complete, too devastating. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Dylan's cruel laughter, his words about her being desperate and pathetic. Kevin knocked softly on the door. Mom, I brought you soup. Amanda's here too. She wants to talk to you. Tracy forced herself to sit up, to look presentable for her children. They were all she had left now. Rob's coldness, his absence, told her everything she needed to know about their marriage. But her children still loved her, still needed her. Amanda entered first, her face drawn with worry that seemed genuine. She'd spent the past week trying to access the accounts she'd helped Tracy set up, only to discover that Rob had frozen everything. Her boutique was failing without his financial backing, and her creditors were circling like vultures. But she couldn't tell her mother about any of that. Not yet. Mom, you have to get up, Amanda said, sitting on the edge of the bed. Dad's planning something. He's moved out of the house, he's not answering my calls, and Kevin says he's been staying at the office. Kevin entered with a tray of food, his expression carefully neutral. He'd spent the week learning to lie to his mother and sister, to play the role of a loyal son while secretly reporting everything back to Rob. It was harder than he'd expected, but his father had taught him that business and war required sacrifices. He knows, Tracy whispered, finally giving voice to her fear. He knows about Dylan. Amanda and Kevin exchanged glances. Kevin's was calculated. Amanda's was panicked. What are you talking about? Amanda asked, but her voice lacked conviction. Tracy looked at her daughter, seeing the guilt written across her face. You know too, don't you? Both of you know. Kevin sat down carefully, playing his part. Mom, I don't understand. What about Dylan? But Amanda couldn't maintain the charade. The stress of the past week, the financial pressure, the realization that Rob was systematically dismantling their lives. It all came pouring out. He has photos, Amanda said. Dad confronted me with evidence. He knows about the affair, about the money, about everything. And he's cutting us off, Mom. All of us. Tracy felt the world tilt around her. Photos. Kevin reached into his jacket and pulled out a tablet, part of his assignment from Rob. I'm sorry, Mom. I think you need to see this. The surveillance footage was devastating. Not just the intimate moments with Dylan, but also meetings with divorce attorneys, conversations with Amanda about hiding assets, discussions about how to maximize her settlement. Rob had been watching, recording, building a case while she thought she was being clever. Oh God, Tracy breathed. How long has he known? Weeks, maybe months, Kevin said. Mom, he's not just angry. He's planning something bigger. Something that's going to destroy all of us if we don't get ahead of it. Amanda leaned forward. What do you mean? Kevin looked at his sister with carefully crafted concern. Dad's not just talking about divorce. He's talking about criminal charges. Theft, fraud, conspiracy. He has lawyers, investigators, people who specialize in making problems disappear. This was the lie Rob had instructed Kevin to tell, the fear he wanted to plant in their minds. Let them think he was planning to have them arrested, prosecuted, destroyed through legal channels. Let them focus their defenses in the wrong direction. He can't do that, Amanda said, but uncertainty crept into her voice. Can he? He's Robert Mitchell, Kevin replied. He owns half the politicians in this city, has judges on his payroll, controls more money than most small countries. If he wants us in prison, we'll go to prison. Tracy's hand shook as she processed this new threat. It wasn't enough that Dylan had humiliated her, that her marriage was over, that her comfortable life was crumbling. Now Rob wanted to destroy her completely, send her to prison for crimes that felt justified at the time. What do we do? She whispered. Kevin stood up, pacing the room like his father. We have to get out ahead of this. File for divorce first, claim abuse, mental cruelty. Make Dad look like the villain before he can make us look like the criminals. But the prenup, Amanda started. Fuck the prenup, Kevin said with surprising vehemence. We'll claim it was signed under duress, that Dad threatened Mom if she didn't sign. We'll paint him as a controlling monster who drove you to seek comfort elsewhere. Tracy looked at her son with something approaching hope. Kevin had always been the level-headed one, the one who thought things through. If anyone could find a way out of this nightmare, it was him. You think that would work? She asked. Kevin nodded confidently, playing his role perfectly. But we have to move fast, before Dad files his own papers, before he can control the narrative. And we need to stick together. All three of us, united against him. What Tracy and Amanda didn't know was that every word of their conversation was being recorded, that Kevin was wearing a wire, that their desperate planning session would be played back in Rob's office within the hour. They were walking deeper into the trap Rob had set, and Kevin was the bait that made it irresistible. As the family huddled together, planning their doomed rebellion, Rob sat in his office across town, listening to their every word and smiling his cold smile. Soon, very soon, they would learn the price of betraying Robert Mitchell. Chapter 7. The Reckoning Begins. The divorce papers Amanda filed on her mother's behalf were works of fiction, painting Rob as an abusive monster who controlled every aspect of Tracy's life through financial manipulation and psychological torture. The media ate it up. Wealthy businessman's wife finally finds courage to escape his tyrannical control, seeks protection from courts after years of silent suffering. Rob's phone buzzed with calls from reporters, business partners, and social contacts, all wanting to know his side of the story. But Rob stayed silent, let the narrative build, let Tracy and Amanda believe they were winning. Meanwhile, his real lawyers, not the ones who'd advised Kevin to recommend this strategy, prepared for war. 3 days after the filing, Rob's response hit the family like a precision strike. Not just a counterfiling, but a complete legal bombardment that revealed the depth of his preparation and the extent of their miscalculation. Amanda was the first to feel the impact. She arrived at her boutique that morning to find it locked, seized by federal marshals executing a court order. The business she'd built with Rob's money, which she'd used as a front for laundering funds stolen from her father, was now evidence in a criminal investigation. Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit theft, the lead marshal explained, handing her the warrant. You have the right to remain silent. Tracy watched the arrest on the noon news, her hands shaking as the reporter detailed the charges against her daughter. Illegal financial transfers, hidden accounts, systematic theft from family businesses. The crimes carried sentences of up to 20 years in federal prison. But that was just the opening move. The real devastation came when Tracy opened her laptop and found that every social media account, every email address, every digital presence she maintained for 2 decades had been compromised. Photos of her affair with Dylan were posted everywhere. Not just the intimate moments, but the planning sessions, the discussions about stealing from Rob, the cruel laughter about how easy it was to deceive her pathetic husband. Her friends, her social circle, her charity organizations. Everyone saw Tracy Mitchell for what she really was. Not a victim of an abusive marriage, but a calculating adulteress who'd been caught red-handed. The narrative she'd tried to control was obliterated in a matter of hours. Kevin called that evening, his voice filled with panic that was only partially feigned. Mom, you need to get out of the house. Dad's not just going after Amanda. He's coming for both of us. What do you mean? Tracy asked, though she was already packing, driven by an instinct that told her to run. I think he's been planning this for months. The divorce filing, Amanda's arrest, it's all connected. He let us make the first moves so he could claim we were the aggressors. Now he's going to destroy us completely. Tracy's paranoia, fed by guilt and genuine fear, made Kevin's lies seem like truth. She'd underestimated Rob, thought his love for his family would make him weak. But the man systematically dismantling her life wasn't weak. He was terrifyingly strong. "Where can we go?" she asked. "I have a plan," Kevin said. "Meet me at the lake house. We'll figure out our next move from there." The lake house, the scene of her affair, the place where Rob's investigators had gathered their most damning evidence. Tracy's mind was too fractured to see the symbolism, to recognize the trap. She was running on pure survival instinct now, and that instinct told her to trust her son. As Tracy's car pulled out of the driveway for the last time, Rob watched from the security feed in his office. She looked broken, defeated, exactly as he'd intended. But this wasn't the end. This was barely the beginning. He turned to Tommy Russo, who'd been documenting every phase of the operation. "Is everything ready at the lake house?" "Cameras, microphones, the works," Tommy confirmed. "Plus your special guest should be arriving right about now." Rob's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Tracy thought she was running to safety, to the comfort of her son's protection. Instead, she was walking into the most carefully orchestrated confrontation of her life, one that would strip away her last illusions and force her to confront the true cost of her betrayal. The lake house waited in the darkness, and with it, the final act of Robert Mitchell's revenge. Chapter 8. The Lake House Confrontation. Tracy arrived at the lake house as the sun set over the water, painting the sky blood red. The building looked different in the dying light, ominous rather than romantic, a monument to her stupidity rather than her secret happiness. Every window seemed to watch her. Every shadow seemed to hide an observer. Kevin's car was already in the driveway, but something felt wrong. The lights were on inside, but she could see figures moving that didn't match her son's silhouette. Her survival instinct screamed at her to run, but she had nowhere left to go. Her bank accounts were frozen, her credit cards canceled, her social circle destroyed. Kevin was all she had left. She knocked on the door she'd once entered with Dylan's key, and Kevin answered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mom, thank God you made it. Come in, we need to talk." Tracy stepped inside and froze. Rob sat in the living room armchair like a king holding court, flanked by Tommy Russo and two other men she didn't recognize. But it was the fourth figure that made her blood turn to ice. Dylan Pierce, bound to a chair with duct tape over his mouth, his face a mess of bruises and terror. "Hello, Tracy," Rob said calmly. "So good of you to join us. Please sit down." Tracy looked at Kevin, confusion and betrayal warring in her expression. "Kevin, what is this?" "This is education," Rob answered before Kevin could speak. "For all of us. Kevin, tell your mother what you've learned this past week." Kevin's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the cold calculation he'd inherited from his father. "I learned that loyalty has to be earned, Mom, and that you never earn mine." The words hit Tracy like physical blows. Her baby, her youngest child, the one she'd thought still loved her unconditionally, had been working against her all along. "Kevin, please," she whispered. "Please what?" Kevin's voice was harder than she'd ever heard it. "Please forgive you for cheating on Dad. Please ignore the fact that you and Amanda tried to steal from the man who gave us everything. Please pretend that you didn't laugh about how pathetic he was while you were fucking your trainer." Rob watched the confrontation with satisfaction. Kevin's transformation was complete, from naive boy to ruthless man in the span of a week. The betrayal had forged him in the same fires that had once forged Rob himself. "Sit down, Tracy," Rob said again, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd never learned to accept no for an answer. Tracy sank onto the couch, her eyes fixed on Dylan. His muffled sounds through the tape were desperate, terrified. Whatever had happened to him before she arrived had broken something fundamental inside him. "Do you know what Mr. Pierce told me when I asked him about you?" Rob asked conversationally. "He said you were pathetic. A desperate middle-aged woman throwing herself at a man young enough to be her son. He said fucking you was like doing charity work, unpleasant but profitable. Each word was a carefully placed knife, designed to cut deep and leave scars. Tracy's face crumpled, but Rob wasn't finished. But that's not the worst part, he continued. The worst part is that he was right. You were pathetic. A woman who had everything. A husband who loved her, children who respected her, a life of luxury and comfort. And threw it all away for what? A few hours with a professional con man who saw you as nothing more than a paycheck. Rob, please. Tracy tried to speak, but he cut her off. 23 years of marriage, Tracy. 23 years of building something together, of trusting you, of believing that we were partners. And you repaid that trust by planning my destruction while smiling to my face every morning. Rob stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the lake. This house was supposed to be our retreat, our private sanctuary. Instead, you turned it into a brothel, defiled every room with your betrayal. Do you have any idea what that feels like? Tracy was crying now, but Rob felt no sympathy. Those tears were for herself, for her situation, not for the pain she'd caused. But here's what you never understood about me, Tracy. I don't forgive. I don't forget. And I don't show mercy to people who betray me. He turned back to face her, his eyes empty of any warmth or love. Not even family. Tommy stepped forward, handing Rob a tablet. The transfer is complete, boss. Everything's been moved to the offshore accounts. Rob nodded, then looked at Kevin. Son, would you like to tell your mother what's happened to her future? Kevin's smile was his father's smile, cold, victorious, final. All of it, Mom. Every account you set up, every asset you try to hide, every penny you thought you'd stolen. Dad found it all, and now it's gone. You have nothing left. Tracy looked around the room at the men who held her life in their hands. Her husband, her son, and the professionals who did their dirty work. She was completely alone, completely powerless, completely destroyed. What are you going to do to me? She whispered. Rob's answer was simple, final, and absolutely terrifying. Everything. Chapter 9. The Price of Betrayal. The final phase of Rob's revenge unfolded with the precision of a military operation. Tracy's destruction wasn't just financial or social. It was complete erasure from the life she'd known. The woman who'd once commanded respect at charity galas and country club luncheons ceased to exist, replaced by a cautionary tale whispered about in the circles she'd once ruled. Amanda's trial became front-page news, her desperate attempts to claim innocence crumbling under the weight of evidence Rob had methodically gathered. The jury saw the bank transfers, heard the recorded conversations, watched surveillance footage of her systematically looting her father's businesses. The 20-year sentence was announced on a Tuesday morning, and Amanda was led away in shackles while photographers captured every moment of her humiliation. Tracy attended the sentencing alone, her request for reconciliation with Kevin ignored, her pleas to Rob for mercy met with cold silence. She'd sold everything of value, jewelry, clothes, even the car, to pay for Amanda's defense attorney, but hadn't mattered. Rob's evidence was overwhelming, his legal team ruthless in their prosecution. Dylan Pierce had disappeared entirely after that night at the lake house. Some said he'd left the state. Others whispered darker possibilities. Rob never confirmed or denied the rumors, but his smile when asked about Dylan's whereabouts told everyone what they needed to know about the price of crossing Robert Mitchell. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Tracy worked as a night shift clerk at a gas station on the wrong side of town. The prenup had held up perfectly, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and the memories of a life she'd thrown away. Her reflection in the store's security mirror showed a woman aged beyond her years, worn down by consequences she'd never imagined possible. Kevin visited her once, not out of love, but to deliver his father's final message. "He wants you to know it's over," Kevin said, standing by the register where his mother counted cigarette packs for minimum wage. "You can stop looking over your shoulder, stop waiting for the next shoe to drop. His revenge is complete." Tracy looked at her son, tall, confident, wearing a suit that cost more than she made in 3 months. Rob had promoted Kevin to vice president of operations, fast-tracking him through the business world as a reward for his loyalty during the family war. "Do you ever think about what we used to be?" Tracy asked. "When you were little, when we were happy." Kevin's expression didn't change. "We were never happy, Mom. We were just good at pretending. The difference is that now we don't have to pretend anymore." He left without saying goodbye, and Tracy knew she'd never see him again. The son she'd raised, who'd once needed bedtime stories and goodnight kisses, was gone forever, replaced by his father's protege. Rob himself never spoke to Tracy again. She'd glimpse him occasionally in news reports or business magazines, usually announcing another acquisition or charitable donation. He'd remarried within 2 years, a younger woman from a good family who understood the value of loyalty and the price of betrayal. They had children together, a new family built on the ruins of the old one. On cold nights, when the gas station was empty and Tracy had nothing but her thoughts for company, she'd remember the moment she'd decided to betray her marriage. It had seemed so simple then, so justified. Rob worked too much, paid too little attention, took her for granted. Dylan offered excitement, passion, the feeling of being desired rather than merely tolerated. But she'd misunderstood the man she'd married. Rob's love hadn't made him weak, it had made him vulnerable. And when that vulnerability was exploited, when his trust was betrayed, he'd become something far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined possible. The gas station security cameras captured her tears, just as other cameras had once captured her laughter with Dylan. But there was no one left to see her pain, no one left to care about her regrets.